It's finally here. You guys have waited, and I wholeheartedly thank you for your patience. This video has been a long time coming, and that's mainly because it took years for me to get through this final season. So you are actually going to be seeing some time jumps throughout this binge watch video, as I waited quite a long time to see a couple of the episodes. So, without any further ado, let's get this binge watch started. So the first episode opens with Lemony Snicket giving us a recap of season 2, and then we are thrown right into where season 2 left off. And man, that was kinda cheap. I mean, it makes sense, so it doesn't completely cheat, but I gotta say, I was hoping they would stop this thing at the last second. But admittedly, the way they do end up getting out was pretty smart and also pretty cool, which is somewhat of a shame, because I was hoping that I would be able to use this.
They just cheated us! This isn't fair! He didn't get out of the cock-a-doodie car!
So we are taken back to Count Olaf, and he is just as awesome and hilarious as I remember. And he even makes a joke about the show.
I am sure they're dead. They fell off a cliff. Please, this isn't some over-exaggerated melodrama.
And the surprise character of this episode is Olaf's henchman. He is genuinely making a lot of logical observations and statements, and Olaf just keeps shaking his head. Now this episode also shows us the mysterious character who had the teapot from the last season, and it turns out that she was in fact Lemony Snicket's sister. And she seems to be the only competent adult character in this world. Whether or not that stays true to the whole season, we will have to see, but I am not holding my breath. I have a feeling she is going to die like her siblings, and I'm guessing the only reason she has that baby is so it will be even more unfortunate when she dies. And oh yeah, these guys are still here. I honestly forgot about these lot. Now we have these two very strange and weird people who seem to have some supernatural powers, and it seems that they killed off the circus freaks. I don't know who these characters are, but my first guess is that they are related to Olaf, because they come off even stranger than he does. And I could be right, because they say something which is quite interesting. They referenced Olaf as if he is a family member.
You're here with little Olaf.
He's just up on that summit. All we need to do is scream and he'll come running.
That's a charming theory.
I'm assuming that this is his mother and father. Just listening to the way they talk, it kind of feels that way. Something tells me we will soon find out. So the Baudelaires continue their journey, and they are chased by what seems to be some type of bees. They retreat into a cave, which scares them off, and they run into...
Hello, cake sniffers.
Carmelita. Just the killer doll I didn't expect to see. Now in all honesty, I was kind of expecting her to show up this season, as one of the commenters in my previous Let's Binge Watch video said that she will make a return in season 3. And the little girl playing Carmelita is still a very good little actress and does a great job of acting like a spoiled brat.
Come on, we don't socialize with orphans.
And when the rest of these kids talk about their pledge, they sound like a cult.
The dance around a special pole, and then I get chosen fall spring queen.
Doesn't have to be you.
Yes, it does. Because I'm the most accommodating basic calm down.
Are you sure?
You know, I was kind of joking when I said Carmelita will grow up to become a serial killer, but now I am convinced of it. She really is going to grow up to be a serial killer. Also, whilst the Baudelaires are here, they come across another kid who is a member of the VFD. Speaking of which, Sunny is also in safe hands because interestingly, the bold henchman seems to be developing a liking to the baby. And that has actually been making him a much more likable character throughout this episode. Their scenes actually put me in a good... oh shit.
On the desk is taped to the 3-hole punch. Now this information...
All my hatred towards Mr. Poe comes rushing back whenever I see him. I really can't stand him. At least he is tied up in the bank, so hopefully we won't be seeing him for a while, especially when you take into account how far away the rest of our characters are. Anyway, Snicket has apparently lost the sugar bowl and is looking for... oh, crud.
Excuse me, I've lost my map and I have no idea where I am.
I will love her character if she drowns him in that pool. She has a good reason to do it. I mean, aside from being in Get Out, the reason her brother is dead is because Mr. Poe is the one who stupidly ID'd him as Count Olaf. Oh, who am I kidding? They aren't going to kill off Mr. Poe, but a guy can dream.
A woman in your condition shouldn't be out here all alone.
No. No, she shouldn't.
Let me help you.
Gross. Never accept or touch a rag from Mr. Poe. Also, do you remember that revelation we got in season 2 where the Baudelaires found out that there was a survivor of the fire? And do you remember what I said in that part of the video? I wonder if he's talking about the Baudelaires house fire or the Quagmires. And it turns out I was absolutely right. The survivor wasn't one of the Baudelaire's family, it was one of the Quagmires. And it turns out the Quagmire was the boy in the mask the whole time. And that is where our episode ends. And for the first episode of season 3, it was pretty good. It gets you back into the mood of this ridiculously exaggerated world, and it makes you interested in seeing what happens next. We are also introduced to what turns out to be Olaf's mentors, which is interesting. And in general, the comedy in this episode is really good and very fitting with this show's tone. And it makes me feel happy to watch more episodes, especially when a lot of the comedy is poking fun at this show's most frustrating and overused tropes. That was especially therapeutic to me. As for other stuff I noticed in this episode, they are actually letting Sunny form words this time round. Also, when you take into account how crazy the show is, it'd be funny if Snicket never even had a baby under there. Or, of course the baby is there so you can feel extra bad when or if she dies. Because as we all know, any characters that come to help the Baudelaires usually die. And I'm gonna call it now, I bet she is going to die in this season, which would be a bloody shame if she did, because I would hate to know that all 3 of the Snicket siblings died, especially when the last one showed such promise last season. You know, after this moron killed him. So, all my ranting aside, this was a fun start to the season, and I'm very interested to see what happens in episode 2. Alright, we are on to episode 2, and it turns out that the little Quagmire lived in Montgomery's house for a while, and to my understanding, Montgomery had already died at this point, so the house was empty. He soon left the house so he could look for his brother and sister, but Violet and Klaus tell him that they rescued them and they are safe. We then cut back to Olaf's mentors, and I gotta say, they are very strange and creepy. One of the reasons is that the lady with hair but no beard says that she had an infant servant, and it's implied that she killed it. Not only that, it's also implied that they killed the freaks from the last episode. I can't say I care for those guys, but these two definitely do seem like they are more of a threat than Olaf. And I don't like that very much, because this runs the risk of taking the spotlight off of Olaf. Here's hoping that Olaf kills them or something and takes the reins back, because if these two are overused, then this could take the spotlights off of Olaf, and I don't want that to happen. So we are taken back to the adventures of Snicket and Mr. Poe, and wouldn't you know it, this guy is actually trying to recruit Sister Snicket here for a desk job. If he offered me a desk job, I would respond with a kick in the nuts, or a shotgun to the chest, but she's unfortunately not a character from Get Out, so that's not gonna happen. And I really like how Olaf has now been reduced to the same level as his henchman, and that led to this great joke.
Do you know how it feels to try so hard to please people who fail to recognize your talent?
Not at all.
And to me, this is the best joke out of this whole episode.
Read.
No way! This is totally different from the last time we locked you in a bird cage. This bird cage is bigger.
Why?
I don't know, I think it's for trapping eagles.
Why? How? Olaf.
You're asking why a grown man would knowingly engage in morally questionable behavior? You'll understand when you're older.
I really do love the ironic comedy in this season. It could run the risk of getting old, but right now, I don't mind getting more of them. Also, Olaf tries to impress his mentors by giving them a historically accurate story of his actions in seasons 1 and 2 of the show. And aside from the first joke he made, I thought it was kind of silly, even for him. Thank goodness his mentors told him to stop. Oh, and by the way, I'm calling them his mentors because they kind of established that they raised him, but he never calls them mum and dad, so I'm assuming they just raised him, but they're not his biological parents. Oh, and Olaf didn't realize that he essentially gave a signaling device to Sunny. His mentors realized though, and that led to this juvenile but still very funny scene.
What were you thinking, giving a verdant flammable device to Sonny Baudelaire?
Ow! How dare you give a cigarette to a baby?
But I didn't. Ow!
Olaf's dialogue can be so hypocritical sometimes, and I love the way he keeps blaming his own mistakes on his henchmen. Olaf's mentors also find out that he wants to get the Baudelaire's fortune, and they tell him to think bigger. What, are they going to take the Quagmire's fortune as well?
After tonight, countless orphans and their fortunes will be ours.
Are you sure they're all orphans?
Not yet, they're not.
Shit, man. That is dark. Man, these two have got to go. They've not even been here that long and already they pose far more of a threat than Olaf ever has in these 2+ seasons. Also, I don't know if it's because I have not seen the show in a while, but it really felt like Snicket was narrating a whole lot more than usual in this episode. Like, it happens every couple of minutes and it was slowing the pace of the episode down. Now, one of my viewers told me in my previous Let's Binge Watch video that Snicket's appearances will all make sense by the end of season 3, so I will reserve judgment on Lemony Snicket for the conclusion segment of this video. So, going back to the episode, there was was also this scene which was quite a touching moment. Violet finds Sunny and is going to let her escape, but Sunny says that she's going to stay so she can spy on Olaf. That was kind of strange, but the touching moment is when she ties her hair like Violet to show that she means business. And I thought this was a genuine scene. It was overly dramatic, but it was still a genuine scene. Oh, and Esme shows up and the kids capture her. And Violet here says Klaus's name so loud that Esme figures out that the Baudelaires survived that death stunt earlier. Now Quagmire here says they should use her as a trade for Sunny, but Klaus and Violet decide not to do that because they think they will become too much like Olaf, which is just plain stupid. Context and intentions is everything. If they use her as an exchange to get their baby sister back, then that doesn't make them like him. I mean, unless they have any deadly or torturous intent, they're morally in the clear. Instead, they climb up the ice and bring her along with them.
I still don't like the plan. Me neither, but what choice do we have?
Now, the most interesting part of this episode, and the entire show in general, is this scene where Olaf's mentors tell him to throw Sunny off the cliff. Naturally, he tells the old twins to do it, and as it turns out, they tell him no. The reason being is because they realize that their parents died in a fire too, just like all of these orphan kids. I'm actually surprised that they didn't make this connection before, the idiots. But this joke made me forgive it.
We lost our parents and our home in a fire. We're starting to think it wasn't a coincidence. We lost our sister too.
I don't care about some late series backstory. You will obey my order this instant!
And yeah, they actually decide to leave. And funnily enough, the rest of Olaf's henchmen decide to leave too, as they suddenly start to question their life choices. It's about time. The only one that doesn't leave is the guy with the hooks for hands. He throws the cage off the cliff, and we see that Olaf really wasn't going to let Sunny fall to her death because he would not be able to have the Baudelaire's fortune, which led to this funny line.
My fortune!
At last, after all these years.
We have eliminated the Baudelaires.
I got some bad news about that.
My fortune!
Really, there are several funny jokes in this episode. And by the way, it's obvious that Sunny is still alive. We see Hookhands sneak off when the idea of killing the baby was being thrown around, and Sunny makes an awesome comeback.
You know, I swear she was in that cage, boss.
I will deal with you later.
That was great. Also, Carmelita joining Olaf and Esme and gleefully smiling when her own group is being flown away while screaming, it just shows what a little monster she is. She's practically become a child supervillain. I would even go as far as to call her a devil child. So the episode ends in a very dark place where Olaf's mentors kidnap the kids and burn their houses down, killing their parents. They actually managed to accomplish far more in half an episode than Olaf has in these 2+ seasons. One thing though, I don't know if all the parents are really dead, as I don't think the show will go that dark. I wonder if later on we will get the parents all coming back and say that they were out and when they came home their houses were burned down. And then all his parents will be mad at Olaf and his mentors. That's my guess. I don't know if it will happen, but it will be pretty darn cool if it does. But we'll see. As for the problems I had with this episode, well, first off, some of these effects are absolutely terrible. And my second problem is that it feels like it's treading over old ground. Just like the last season, they find a Quagmire and get separated from him. This part of the episode really did feel irritatingly unoriginal. But then again, the previous 2 seasons felt like they were repeating themselves a lot as well, so this isn't completely out of place, I suppose. But that doesn't denounce the fact that this is just the same thing happening again. That being said, I still really enjoyed this episode, and I look forward to seeing what is going to happen next. So, it's been a whopping 5 months since I saw the last 2 episodes, and I am only now continuing the show. What can I say? I had a lot of videos to work on. So the episode continues where the last episode left off. A submarine rises right in front of the Baudelaires, and after a narration from Lemony Snicket, who tells us yet again how much of a terrible tale this is going to be, they go inside and meet a girl called Fiona Widdershings. They ask her if she can give them a loft so they can meet up with Quagmire, who they got separated from in the last episode, but she says no because she is already pursuing a mission of her own, and that mission is to search for the sugar bowl. We then cut to Olaf, and what do you know? He's gone back to doing disguises. Oh, fun. Going by the first 2 episodes, I actually thought that the show was going to move away from that, but apparently they're not. Now, up until this point, I thought all of the kid actors that the Baudelaires run into were performed very well by the kid actors. But Fiona Widdershings here is the first one that I really didn't like. Why? Well, because whereas everyone else in this show has adapted their acting styles to this show's unusual tone, this girl acts like she is shooting a kids show that airs on the BBC. That's what she reminded me of whenever she was on screen, and especially when she would talk.
Hey, Cookie, get out here.
Baudelaires!
Phil!
Phil.
And Cookie turns out to be Phil. Can you believe it? I actually can't remember who Phil is. Who is he?
I'm glad you got out of that terrible lumber mill.
Oh right, he was in the first season in that mill episode, yeah. I still can't remember that. I saw the first season so long ago. We then cut to Quagmire, who goes to Mr. Poe for help. Poor kid, if only he knew. But luckily, he runs into Sister Snicket instead. I wish I could say I'm relieved, but I'm just hoping that she isn't incompetent like her brother from last season. And meanwhile, Klaus and Fiona romantically bond over mushrooms. Say, didn't he have a thing with that Quagmire girl in season 2? Why is he having another potential love interest?
So now you with Charlotte?
Yes, I am.
Many females in your village, baboon.
Mm-hmm.
Why you pick only one?
Now there is something interesting that happens with Captain Hook here. He makes food for everyone, and then Olaf and Esme tell him to go and eat with the rats because he's not part of their family. Now I would feel sorry for Captain Hookhands here, but I don't. Because the way this scene was written and directed felt so much like a cartoon. And usually a series of unfortunate events has a little bit of grit to it, but it really didn't here, and it was really needed. But you can tell this is going to be the motivator for him to completely turn on Olaf later in the season. Now throughout this episode, Violet has been suspecting Fiona of not telling them something, and it turns out that what she was keeping from them, for some reason, is that there is a Medusa mushroom monster where they are headed. And for some reason, she lets Violet suspect her and not trust her, rather than just tell her straight out what the problem was. I honestly think the only reason she didn't tell them is because the writers just wanted to set up a forced conflict here. Because without the lack of trust, then very little would be happening on this submarine. And I think the way they decided to execute this mystery was very poorly written. And the monster itself hardly has any good sound design. It's basically just the sound of an elephant. I mean, I know you are a Netflix show, but you should still be able to come up with a more interesting sound design than this.
I wish you were here.
Is it just me, or does her stepfather kinda look like Captain Birdseye? Anyway, Olaf boards Fiona's ship hoping that the captain will tell him where the Baudelaires are, but of course, he doesn't know that the Baudelaires are really in the ship, and what the fish is that?
Holy mackerel!
Yes, I believe you're right, Ed.
You know, Esme has worn some stupid costumes in the past, but this takes the stupid Cookie. Even for her, I honestly can't tell if the costume designers for this show were deliberately taking the mick or not. And oh, we have Phil here giving away the Baudelaire's location.
When did you change? We boarded this sub like right away.
It's just something I threw together.
Oh, you look great!
I don't know what's worse, that he gave away their location, or that he said she looks great.
Oh, you look great!
Ulrich, you are either lying, blind, or mad.
Anyway, hijinks ensues, and then Esme figures out that the kids have found the location to the sugar bowl, and she lovingly tries to break the news to Olaf.
But darling!
They already have.
It can't be there though, because 2 episodes ago we saw Snicket here running away with a sugar bowl. So they send the Baudelaires out to retrieve it, and one thing that doesn't make sense is that we all know that the Medusa monster is out there, so I am surprised that Olaf didn't keep Sonny as insurance, so that if the other 2 die, then he can still have a chance at getting their fortune. But by not doing that, he is technically killing his one and only chance to get it. So Fiona sends an SOS message and it goes to Sister Snicket. She replied saying that she is going to send help, and Fiona very quickly hides after Hookie here shows up. He leaves the room and she stupidly gets out of her hiding spot straight away without waiting for a bit. And what do you know? She should have waited for a bit. And as expected, the sugar bowl isn't here as Snicket had it in the first episode. Anyway, it turns out that Quagmire here has the sugar bowl, and he is the backup that Snicket sent here. The stairway gets infected with poisonous mushrooms, however, and so the Baudelaires have to go back to the ship with Olaf. And what do you know? The inside of Sonny's helmet is also infected with the mushrooms, and for some reason, Klaus and Violet are reacting, but not taking the damn thing off. I mean, seriously, they're just standing there. And that's our cliffhanger. Overall, I found this episode to be dull and pretty boring. It felt like it was padding itself out, and the story itself had potential, but it didn't do much. This episode also has some smart setups, namely when the Baudelaires are under the ocean, and there are any number of things that could have happened here, but unfortunately, nothing did. So yeah, this episode was really nothing special to me, but here's hoping they will end this 2-parter with an episode that has much less padding. Okay, now believe it or not, but it's been a whole year since I saw episode 3, and a lot has happened in this time with regards to the shows I watch. I finally stopped watching The Flash after episode 2 of season 6 because the show now truly sucks. I have watched and reviewed every episode of The Mandalorian season 1 on my Patreon, and I have also made a Let's Binge Watch video of the final season of Star Wars The Clone Wars. And I finally forced myself to sit down and watch the next episode of a series of unfortunate events as well as the rest of the season. So yeah, episode 4 opens up exactly where I remember episode 3 left off, and even though Sunny was apparently going to die, big shock, she doesn't. I predicted this a year ago, and ever since, I just didn't feel like watching the continuation as it was this repetitive and predictable nature of the show that really put me off continuing it. But you guys still to this day are asking me to review it, so I've decided to continue watching. You know me, I can't say no to you, but trust me, if it wasn't for you guys, I would not have finished watching the rest of this season. We will talk more about that in my concluding thoughts of the show. So yeah, Sunny has only an hour to live and needs an antidote. Meanwhile, we find out that Carmelita and the kidnapped orphans are rowing the boat, and Olaf locks the Baudelaires in the brig, not caring that Sunny will die. Very shortly after, the guy with hooks for hands shows up, and I remember how much I was growing to like this guy this season. And yeah, he shows up with the intentions to torture information out of the kids, but then he sees that Sunny is dying, and he agrees to help the kids escape. And like I said before, I really do like the development of this character. He is by far the most interesting character I've seen this season so far, which only makes me worry for him as kind characters usually suffer a horrible fate in this show. So he leads the Baudelaires out and says he's going to check to see if the coast is clear.
I'll go see if the coast is clear. Oh, you scared me. Scared me, boss.
Funnily enough, it turns out that Olaf is lost. Hooky here says he will show him the way, which leads to this funny joke.
I don't know what I'd do without you, Hooky.
Thanks,
but
boss.
you're still not family. Now off to the wine room.
It's been a while since I've seen another episode, and I always forget how much I like some of the humor in this show. So the characters very carefully get past Carmelita and Esme. Smooth. And I've gotta say, the acting from both Klaus and Violet in this episode is kind of below par. In this episode, they are acting worried and panicked that Sunny is going to die, and the fear they are trying to convey in their voices and facial expressions is not convincing. Now the kids are trying, but it is not one of their best performances. So yeah, Sunny is saved 12 minutes into the episode, and is anyone surprised? I don't think so. And this is meant to be a nice emotional moment, and it just didn't hit at all. Meanwhile, we have drunk Olaf here who wants to win the approval of his mentors. Then we cut to our characters and Fiona gives them a note telling them to arrive at the enclosed location on the message. And in a surprising twist, we find out that Fiona and Hooky are brother and sister. I never would have predicted that. We then cut to Lemony Snicket, who tells us a similar connection he has with his siblings, and he even talks about his own emotional state that he will most likely not see his siblings again, and that it's best that they think he is dead. Now this I really like. Snicket usually breaks the mood and flow of the story, and he does it here too, but the reason it really works here is because we get some more insight into his actual character, as opposed to just seeing him as a narrator with next to no personality. For the first time, this actually gives him a personality and something to mourn over. So this actually gives the story an extra layer of character development and emotion, as opposed to his other narrations. We then cut to Hook Hands here, and he gets a little backstory of his own. Then, Olaf shows up and finds out that Hooky here let the Baudelaires go, and he tries to kill him by choking him to death. But then Fiona convinces Olaf that Hooky...
His name is Fernald.
And I call him Hooky.
Yeah, so am I. As I was saying, Fiona convinces Olaf that Hooky released the Baudelaires from the brig so he can extract the poison out of Sunny and give it to Olaf as a weapon. Olaf then offers Fiona a chance to join him along with Hooky, and in a turn which is quicker than Anakin turning to the dark side in Revenge of the Sith, Fiona changes sides and joins Olaf.
We don't have much time.
You're not taking us to the brig?
Of course not. I'm letting you escape.
Oh, it turns out she was lying. Well, nice one, Fiona. Klaus begs her to come with them and not to join Olaf, and she says that she can't because she wants to stay with her brother. And then she gives Klaus a peck on the lips, which honestly, I just found awkward. I feel like Klaus had more of a romance with Sister Quagmire than he did Fiona, and now he's moving on to another love interest. That was weird. So yeah, it's very interesting to see Fiona and Hooky here, who seems to have taken a complete 180. He clearly is now against everything that Olaf is doing, and he has pretty much turned into a good guy now. So yeah, the episode ends with Olaf and Esme on their way to laugh at the Baudelaires in the brig, which when they find out that they are not there, will mean terrible things for Fiona and Hooky. And the Baudelaires continue their journey and arrive in the exact same location where they started when this show began, and oh no.
I had given up all hope of finding you, and I decided to visit this beach to indulge in some sadness and rocks.
Wasn't he with Mr. Snicket?
Baudelaires! I hope you haven't been waiting long.
Oh yes, please, take them away from this lunatic. I don't want a repeat of mistakes with this guy's mishandling of the kids. And he's still under the impression that she's his secretary.
Baudelaires, I insist you come with me. You've been accused of murder, arson, kidnapping, and all sorts of assorted
Yeah, all thanks to you.
Since you ran away from your problems, it became clear to me that the stem of your troubles is from not having a clear guardian figure in your life.
The stem of their troubles came from you.
Perhaps it's time for that guardian to be me.
You freak. The nerve of this guy.
Perhaps it's time for that guardian to be me.
Fuck you, asshole.
But don't be ridiculous.
Thankfully, the Baudelaires go with Sister Snicket and say goodbye to Mr. Poe. I hope that means he doesn't show up in the rest of the show. Actually, I take that back. I want him to come back in the rest of the show so I can see him die, because let's not forget that he caused the death of Brother Snicket in Season 2, and for turning the Baudelaires into criminals, and for pointlessly hogging the show's screen time. He deserves to get what's coming to him. I hope that Olaf kills him off by the end of the show. Let's make a little bet. If the show does kill off Mr. Poe by the end, then I will give this season 2 more points in my final score. We'll see if that happens by the end. So, the episode ends with the Baudelaires on their journey with Sister Snicket now, and with no Mr. Poe to get her killed, hopefully she is a lot more capable of keeping the kids safe and protecting herself against Olaf. I hope. So this episode opens with Lemony Snicket giving a hint as to what is going to happen in these next 2 episodes. We then continue on our journey with the Baudelaires and Sister Snicket, and I gotta say, the actress that plays her, Alison Williams, the only other thing I've seen her in is Get Out, which makes me all the more infuriated that she hasn't dealt with Mr. Poe yet, and in that movie her acting is completely normal. She acts like a normal person, well, for the first half of the movie at least, but in a series of unfortunate events, like everyone else on the show, she is talking in this really exaggerated and ironic tone.
It may seem like I'm speeding recklessly because I'm a taxi driver who doesn't care about traffic safety laws, but really I'm trying to shake the car that's been following us.
And it just comes off as more jarring and distracting when she does it as opposed to everyone else. Now the plot in this episode is laid out very nicely. Sister Snicket here says that she knows her brother is dead, I bet she doesn't know by who, and that someone is assuming his identity and is feeding the VFD information in her brother's name. And Kit Snicket here asked the Baudelaires if they could dress in disguises and infiltrate a hotel and learn the identity of whoever is impersonating her brother. And I gotta say, that is a very interesting plot. Nice, simple, and different to what we usually get in this show. We then cut to Olaf, who is also on his way to the hotel, and...
We'll take the Olaf.
It's called the Carmelita 2.
It's called the Olaf.
It's called the Carmelita 2.
We'll discuss it on the way.
That's funny. I like how Carmelita is really getting him rattled up, and he can't say anything about it because Esme keeps encouraging her. And Hooky and Fiona manage to escape off screen. So the Baudelaires have to contact a guy called Frank, and it just so happens that Frank has an identical twin brother called Ernest. And this is ironic because it turns out that Ernest is the evil twin brother. And the Baudelaires have to make sure that they give the information to the right twin and not the evil one. And in a twist, it turns out that Kit Snicket is actually evil. Apparently she's working with the evil twin, who incidentally is her husband. And I gotta tell ya, at this juncture I would usually guess what kind of predictable thing this show is going to do, but I don't know what they're going to do here. The only guess I can come up with is that she thinks she's speaking to the evil twin when really she's talking to the good one. That's my only guess because the slight change in his facial expression when she leaves is a little bit telling. But at the same time, I am not fully convinced that she is evil yet, so if it sounds like I'm not that surprised with her supposed turn to the dark side, it's because I'm not. So evil Sister Snicket gets back in her taxi, and I'm assuming that we have the real Lemony Snicket in the car because his hair is a bit of a mess.
Evidence of a picnic, like evidence of a secret meeting, is best discarded, or it is likely to attract unsavory visitors.
Lemony, I thought you were dead.
If they made him look all clean and done up, then I would have had a tougher time knowing if it was really him or not, but they kind of gave it away with a slightly scruffy look. She seemed to address him with a bit of an attitude, and he asked for a drive. And then we have the narrator version of Lemony Snicket tell a story that this is him in his much more younger and naive days, and that if he could go back, he would give himself some advice. One is to wear a darker suit as it helps him hide better, and the second is that he leave the taxi and never went in it in the first place. And that is a part of this narration that I really like. I don't like like when he is narrating the story for others, but when he is narrating the story for himself, it's actually quite interesting because you can hear the feeling of regret and sorrow in his voice. And it just further makes you think, just what is going to happen? So this is yet another appearance of narrator Lemony Snicket that I really do like. And that's impressive. 2 episodes in a row, and I'm already much more fond of Snicket's appearances. I wouldn't go as far as to say that it justifies his other overabundance of appearances in the previous seasons, but in these couple of instances, it helps make the show more interesting. So, we are kind of disappointingly taken inside the hotel, and from here we are following the Baudelaires again in their possibly corrupt mission for Sister Snicket. And funnily enough, when they go into the hotel, they see Olaf and his crew in disguises again, and then this happens.
You!
Concierge. Find the manager and tell him to bring a nice bottle of wine to our room. Something red.
Okay, now my bet is that this show is trying to make it appear that Olaf doesn't know that those are the Baudelaires, but I'm not buying it, because when the Baudelaires had a better disguise at the end of season 2, he still managed to see through it, and I do not for 1 second believe that he would be fooled by this poor excuse of a disguise. So my guess is that Olaf recognized them, and then he went back into character so he could fool the kids into thinking that he isn't onto them when really he is. Oh, and get this.
Remind me why we can't send her back to her parents.
We burnt down their house with them inside.
What did you say? Nothing, darling.
Whoa. Well, I guess the other kids can make fun of the fact that she is an orphan now too, so there's that. So, they bump into...
Frank or Ernest?
Exactly.
Yeah, that one. And then they bump into...
You must be our new concierges. Welcome to the Hotel Denouement. I'm one of the managers.
Are you Frank or Ernest?
I am.
Okay, now I'm confused. So our characters try to figure it out, and I don't trust either yes or I am. And whichever one this is knows that these are the Baudelaires, and they stupidly keep asking him, are you Frank or are you Ernest? Because it doesn't matter which of the 2 brothers they ask. If he was honest, he would say Frank, and if he was dishonest, he would say Frank. So there is no point asking that question, and because there is a risk that the kids are talking to either Frank or Ernest, it makes no sense why Kit Snicket would ask the Baudelaires to speak to them, because there is a high chance that whatever she wants them to do will fail. So this is a pretty stupid plan when you get down to it. So the episode goes on with the Baudelaires acting like the concierge, and then we see, oh god, what is this headmaster doing here? I mean, who are we gonna see next?
Thank goodness you got here so fast.
What the hell is she doing here?
The sauna's on the 2nd floor.
My, you're smart. Have you considered being a doctor?
Well, doctors are dumb in this universe, so what?
You two are a couple?
Yes, we met at a support group for people who were terrorized by Esme squalor.
What the hell is going on here? Oh no. If you're here, and you're here, and you're here, then that means... Oh no.
That's odd. I could have sworn I heard someone knock at the door.
Bye, Joe.
You and me both, Sonny. So after some hijinks ensues, it turns out that all of these returning characters are actually here to help the Baudelaires, with the exception of Mr. Poe, of course, and... that's got to be a drink or something that he's dropped on himself. I mean, that can't really be...
It's blood.
Okay. Moving on.
It's the oddest thing, but this hotel is positively packed with familiar faces. You must be JS.
Call me Snicket. Jacques Snicket. We've never met.
Oh, you're most certainly right, we've never met. I may forget a name, but I never remember a face.
Oh god. I really hope you are here to die, Mr. Poe. I mean, all the characters are here. Have them all kill you. Holy shit.
Which is why I am not going to let you out of my sight.
I haven't seen this kind of knife threatening since the first season of this show. Honestly, Larry here should tell Mr. Poe that this is not Jacques Snicket. Why doesn't he? Oh, what's the point? Logic isn't one of the qualities this show has many times, so I think it's about time I stop asking for it. So Larry gets captured by Olaf and Ernest and probably dies, and he could have stopped it, but he stupidly didn't, so I don't care if he dies or not. He got captured with bloody kitchen utensils in season 2, and now by a rope. If you ask me, let him drown. Now throughout the episode, the twins are asking the Baudelaires to do stuff, and if you ask me, the twins seem to be asking the Baudelaires to set up pieces of security to stop someone from breaking into the hotel. The question is, who are they trying to keep out? Someone good or someone bad? While we ponder on that, it turns out that Justice Strauss has been tracking down the Baudelaires throughout all of their journeys in season 1, 2 and 3, and she tried to organize this event so she can get everyone who have witnessed Olaf's crimes in one place, get their sides of the story and have him locked away. Now, usually, I would think that things would go wrong, but because this is the last season and we have 2 episodes left, I still think that it's not going to work out. Why? Well, firstly, because we have 2 episodes left, and second reason, and most important, the whole episode has been echoing one word.
If I can trust you.
So we cut back to Kit and Lemony catching up, and it turns out that Lemony Snicket faked his death. That's why Kit was both surprised and slightly annoyed to see him earlier. And they both tried to save the kidnapped orphans from Olaf's mentors. Well, Kit tries to do that. Lemony asks if there is anything he can do to help, and she gives him the keys to her taxi, and he drives off somewhere. We then cut back to the Baudelaires, who think things over and realize that they don't add up. They find a secret level in the elevator, and it turns out that the twins aren't twins. They're triplets, and Kit was married to the third brother this whole time, and his name is Dewey. That was actually pretty clever. I genuinely didn't see that coming. And he offers the library to the Baudelaires to take over whilst he lives a life with Kit Snicket and his baby. The Baudelaires are in 2 minds about this, and right when they are trying to think it over, and we are about to be told what's in the sugar bowl, guess who shows up?
An interesting question. I searched the hotel for you orphans, which wasn't easy because it's very poorly organized.
And a lot actually happens in this climax. Olaf disowns Carmelita, he actually dumps Esme, and the Baudelaires talk him out of shooting them. They tell him you don't have to do this, and Olaf gets perhaps the most development we have seen from him.
It's all I know how to do.
Wow, that's actually pretty deep. For a character like Olaf who-
What's going on out here? Good God, that man's been shot.
Damn you, Mr. Poe! You always show up to screw things up for the Baudelaires. Everything was going fine until you showed up. Well, maybe you can say it was Olaf, seeing as this is clearly Olaf and he is not in disguises anymore. You can be a witness that he was the one pointing a gun at them.
Baudelaires, you just shot that man with the harpoon gun, along with that other man who I didn't get a really good look at. You're going to wait right here till I get the manager.
You son of a... And you wanted to be their guardian. Why the hell is Mr. Poe even here anyway? I understand why all the other characters are here, but of all people to bring this big book down, why did it have to be Mr. Poe? Just when you think he couldn't possibly screw things up anymore, he went ahead and did it again. Seriously, I want Mr. Poe to pay for his crimes throughout this entire show far more than I do Olaf. That's how much I despise this character. But on a much more light-hearted note, after all this time of narrating the Baudelaire story, Lemony Snicket finally meets them. And much like when his sister met them, this is where the episode ends. And this was actually a pretty fun episode. It was a mind twister as it constantly kept you guessing, and I really liked the inclusion of the Snicket siblings. I just wish we got more of them, because they are honestly a lot more interesting than the Baudelaires right now. But of course, the episode had to end with that final convenient screw-up, and I hate it when the show does that. There was one scene, however, that I really liked in this episode, and it was this.
Oh, I'm afraid I can't discuss that. Banker-client confidentiality.
Pretend your life depended on it.
I really hope that this is foreshadowing Mr. Poe's fate. I really do. And we only have 2 more episodes to go before this show is over, so let's see what happens next. So the episode opens with a flashback of Kit Snicket, Olaf, Esme, and Lemony Snicket watching the opera. And the opera is being performed by the Baudelaire's mother, and we find that Lemony Snicket is practically infatuated with her, and it became immediately apparent to me that all those notes that we got at the beginning of each of these episodes, it turns out that they were all being written by Lemony Snicket. I mean, he was always my first guess, but this just confirmed it for me. So yeah, that was interesting. One thing I've always liked about this show is how it gives us the backstories to these characters and how it shows us just what their relationships were like before greed got the better of some of them. And to see some of these characters all coupled up like this is so bizarre. And it turns out that Lemony Snicket was always a bookworm who goes into the definition of the meaning of words like a walking dictionary. So I guess that explains why he keeps explaining the meaning of words throughout these episodes. It doesn't justify it, but it does explain it. We also see Olaf's father for a split second, and then we go back to the present. Lemony Snicket offers the Baudelaires the chance to leave with him, but they decide to stay under the protection of Justice Strauss, and he drives away. And then they come back into the hotel, and guess what?
I recognize them from the newspaper. They murdered a man named Count Olaf in a village.
Well, I recognize them from my village, where they murdered Count Olaf.
All of Mr. Poe's stupidity comes back to bite them on the arse all at once. And Mr. Poe is there to accuse them as well, even though he is the only one that all of these people should be accusing of murder. Although, to be perfectly honest, the Baudelaires were really careless here, and I would say that in this particular case, they are partly to blame as well. Thankfully, Justice Strauss is here to back them up. I'm guessing that means that she is going to die then. And then...
Excuse me, Your Honor. I caught Count Olaf lurking in the hedges.
Thank you, Frank.
Nice try, but this isn't Frank. It's Ernest.
Actually, I am Frank.
Curses.
I love this entire scene. I wish it went on for longer, because everything is on the table here, as opposed to Olaf always trying to hide his vile acts when the adults are around. This is a very nice change. It's a shame though that they don't call everyone in the hotel to come and see that Olaf is really alive. See, it's basic things that they don't do in the show that really makes me hate it at times. So Klaus decides to brush up on his knowledge of law in preparation for Olaf's court hearing. Mr. Poe prepares to come to court as well for some reason, and Justice Strauss actually gets him to escort the Baudelaires to the courtroom. I guess she's not as smart as I gave her credit for. And because these adults are all acting like children, they take the phrase "justice is blind" literally, and everyone has to arrive with blindfolds on. The show just keeps surprising me with how weird it can get sometimes. Oh, and we get this little reunion.
Hello, Esme.
Have we met? You sound familiar.
It's me, Jerome. Your husband?
Oh, that true. You've got your name. And your face.
And then Mr. Poe says this.
I have to tell you, children, sorry, I had my doubts about Count Olaf from the moment I placed you in his care, and today the world will finally see the truth.
Oh, you piece of... Okay, he hasn't died yet, but I will take what I can get. And just look at this courtroom. This is like the Avengers Endgame equivalent of bringing back all of the characters throughout this show's history. And I like how Justice Strauss is talking kindly to the Baudelaires and is speaking with hostility towards Olaf.
Your objection is noted, though I caution the defendant about speaking out of turn.
Is this out of turn?
Yes.
So for the 1000th time, the Baudelaires tell everyone what happened, and for the first time, all the characters throughout this show actually listen to them. The whole audience applauds, and I'm sure that the writers of the show are just trolling us with Mr. Poe's comments here.
If only you children had told me what you were going through.
I mean, they've got to be. Throughout all of this though, Olaf seems to be very relaxed, and the Baudelaires notice this, and it's because of that...
We call Count Olaf to the stand.
And what was a pleasant surprise is that Olaf actually takes a dig at all of the characters in this courtroom.
These people are here to help us.
Help you? Look around. I see a banker who cares more about a promotion than 3 orphans.
That's what I have always been saying.
I see a man who is too afraid to protect you and a woman who values paperwork over people's lives. I see a vice principal who is more than happy to let me into his school as long as I stroked his ego. I see villagers who only took you in to do their chores. I see volunteers whose complicated codes and pretentious literary references are useless against the real treacheries of the world. And, presiding over them all, a justice so blind, she let me marry you. These so-called decent people have done more to help my schemes than any of my associates. They should be up here right now.
That was amazing.
You think so?
Of course it was. It was extraordinary. It was quite extraordinary.
This is so good. He is 100% right. Although stupidly, the Baudelaires put Olaf on the stand to question him, but instead, he starts questioning them, and Justice Strauss doesn't get him to shut up. Nor do the Baudelaires say that you are the one that's on the stand, not us. Even Esme gets put on the stand, and she is finally about to tell us what is in the damn sugar bowl.
Ever since we met you, you've been obsessed with the stolen sugar bowl. We want to know why.
I thought you'd never ask.
We are shown what happened in the rest of that flashback, and we see the Baudelaire's mother and Lemony Snicket took the sugar bowl, and Esme finds out. She chases them, and they engage in a poisonous dart-throwing fight. It happens. The other characters come in, and by accident, it turns out that Olaf's father got killed by Lemony Snicket. And this is where Olaf makes his turn to the dark side. And in a surprise twist, we are not told what is in the sugar bowl, but that might actually be worth it, because we find out that Esme has poisoned all of the characters in the courtroom, and the first one to get it is Mr. Poe.
He really should get that looked at.
Oh, it turns out that it wasn't that bad at all. It was just an overuse of pepper, and we still haven't been told what is in that damn sugar bowl.
The court will deal with you later. Sit down.
Well, that was disappointing. You almost got 2 extra points, you silly show. All you had to do was kill Mr. Poe. Heck, if you did something this dark and killed everyone in the courtroom, then I would probably have thrown in a third point. I mean, you didn't have to go all Quentin Tarantino, but going Jack Nicholson Joker wouldn't have been so bad either. I mean, if you don't want to make it that violent, then there are other less disturbing ways of doing it. What a huge fail. If all the witnesses in the courtroom got killed off, then this would have made for an amazingly dark twist that really would have put the Baudelaires in deep danger, perfectly setting up the final episode. But no, we don't get that. And in a lesser twist, it turns out that the Baudelaires are now put on trial and are asked how they plead. Justice Strauss is kidnapped and everyone can't see it because they are keeping their bloody blindfolds on. This show is really stupid, seriously. Killing everyone in the room and then kidnapping her would have been better. And it turns out that Olaf's mentors were in control of this whole thing, and Olaf even admits it to Justice Strauss, who trusted them because she has been working with them for years. I guess this is a commentary that corrupt people usually get positions of power or something, but it just feels like a convenient way to get Olaf out of another jam. Which is a shame, because if they weren't going to kill everyone in the courtroom, then this would have been a pretty epic way to lock him up for all his crimes. Anyway, the Baudelaires chase after them, and Klaus willingly helps Olaf get the sugar bowl. The reason why is because Klaus knows that the sugar bowl isn't in the vault. And why they don't just lock him in this room and close the door, I don't know. With some advice from Sonny though, Olaf decides to burn the hotel down. The Baudelaires force the elevator to make a stop at each floor however, and try to warn everyone on every floor to evacuate the hotel. And it appears that some of them trust them and some of them don't. They go onto the roof and try to escape on a boat, and Justice Strauss doesn't go with them because she says they should trust the law, even though the law in this world is a joke. Kind of like the real world, the more I think about it. And that's this show's way of providing commentary to kids who are watching it, saying that the law is seriously flawed. And it's a good message. And the Baudelaires end up with Olaf again, much like the first season. Oh, and we still don't know what the sugar bowl is. They really are dragging this out, aren't they? And we find out that the reason Lemony Snicket regrets his ride in a taxi is because he didn't succeed in taking the Baudelaires with him, and what resulted was this burning building. And in another shocking twist, it turns out that the Baudelaires' mother actually threw the dart that killed Olaf's father, not Lemony Snicket. And Olaf was there to hear it. The only question I have is, what took him so long to kill her if it was all about vengeance? Although it does explain why he's taking his anger out on her kids and treating them like crap. But seriously, did he want to get revenge and then a fortune? Because going by this backstory, it seems like he wanted to get revenge. When did the fortune come into it? And why would he want to wait several years for her to give birth to 3 kids and then try to kill her and take her for... I have so many questions. But let's move on. The episode ends with Lemony Snicket explaining that all this time he was telling the story of the Baudelaires and retracing their steps so he can solve the mystery and find the location to their whereabouts, as the last time they were seen by anyone was right here. So the story that he has been telling since this point was all in the past tense, and we have now caught up to the present. And now that we are all caught up, I can only assume that Lemony Snicket is actually not going to narrate the story anymore, and is now going to investigate and find the Baudelaires. So yeah, there seems to have been an actual reason as to why Lemony Snicket has been narrating this whole entire show, something that I have not been fond of since the very first season. And whether I think his narrations are now justified or not, I will let you know in the conclusion segment of this video when I give you my overall final thoughts on this show. But for now, we are here. We have finally arrived to the last episode of Lemony Snicket's A Series of Unfortunate Events. The episode oddly opens up years later where we see a little girl whose last name apparently is...
Miss...
Baudelaire.
We then see Lemony Snicket talking to us again, and apparently he is being watched. I wonder how insane the spy must think that he is, seeing as he is breaking an invisible fourth wall. We then cut to the Baudelaires, and look at how fake this background looks. Anyway, whilst Olaf talks to himself, wondering what he's going to do with the fortune, the Baudelaires try to think what they can do to ditch Olaf. Sonny suggests that they push him into the water, and the 2 stupid Baudelaires here say that it's not right to do something like that, even to someone as evil as Olaf. And this is honestly so stupid. I mean, did they forget that they were willing to push Olaf into the pit of lions in season 2? So where is this sudden stupid conscience coming from? They really don't want this to be over, don't they? But after they finally decide to push him off, it does lead to this funny misinterpreted line.
Well, well, well. It looks like the tide has turned and a storm is brewing. I meant that figuratively.
He meant that literally.
That was funny. So the four wash up on land, and they look so clean. I mean, what is this? Unbreakable. And Violet seems to have had a sudden costume change. Anyway, after washing up on this island, they see a little girl called Friday, and they meet what I can only describe as a hippie version of Gandalf. And Olaf tries to dethrone this dude and take over the island, and thankfully, these people don't mess around, and they lock Olaf in a bird cage. And I gotta admit, this is not how I expected the final episode of this show to go down. It almost feels like the beginning of any other two-part episode. Anyway, Violet and Klaus ask the people questions about their lives on this island, and I just realized who Hippie Gandalf is. It's played by David from the Mr. Bean movie, so he is the Hippie Gandalf. Which is ironic because he also played a hippie camp manager in the Addams Family. Why is this guy always playing such weird roles? Anyway, they ask where Olaf is, and Gandalf here says that they put all of the evil people on a certain part of the island. But for Olaf, however, they're going to put his cage next to the seawall, and when the seawall floods, Count Olaf will die. To which Klaus gives this stupid response.
Isn't that cruel?
I'm kind of glad that this is the final episode, because I can't take the sheer stupidity from the Baudelaires anymore. Now, the Baudelaires provide modern technology ideas that could make things easier for people to perform day-to-day tasks on the island, and Hippie Gandalf here seems to be aggravated by this. However, the Baudelaires have realized that he called them orphans, something they did not disclose to him. So they go to Count Olaf for explanations as to who this guy really is. And it turns out that Olaf recognized him, and that's why Hippie Gandalf locked him in a cage to let him die and drown. Olaf makes a deal with the Baudelaires to free him and he will help them, but rightfully so, they don't trust him and decide to go on their own investigation. So they do have brains. So they follow Ishmael, which is Hippie Gandalf's name, and they find a bunch of objects that got washed up on the island. They see a book which is written with their mother's handwriting, and they find out that Ish is a VFD member, and he tells them that their parents lived on this island. Their parents really got around, didn't they? It also turns out that he actually started VFD, and he is essentially the mentors of all the VFD members. He did this to make the world a better and safer place, but in his words,
it all went up in smoke.
And after the schism happened, he came here to live in exile, and now he wants to save the Baudelaires as he has failed to save their parents. And strangely, we cut back to Lemony Snicket, and he is still giving the exact same narrations that he used to give, even though he is not supposed to know what's going on with the Baudelaires right now. But he is still giving narrations based on what they're going through in this episode. I'm really finding this kind of odd, and it's not at all as smart as it could have been going off of what the last episode showed us. I thought he was going to look for the Baudelaires himself and complete his investigation by going out into the field, but he's just doing the same thing he's done in all the previous episodes. Anyway, the Baudelaires decide to leave because they found out that Ishmael is brainwashing everyone on the island. Then very randomly, they see Kit Snicket being washed away in the ocean, and then, oh no. They're going to believe that he is not Olaf, aren't they?
No, you're not. You're Count Olaf. A child can see that.
Wow. That is the second time these kids have shown more sense than the adults in this show.
You're not a castaway. You're that villain we put in a birdcage.
Baudelaires, are you sure that they are being brainwashed? Because whatever they are drinking seems to be making them smarter as opposed to dumber. That being said, how did Olaf even escape?
I don't know how you got out of that cage.
I picked the lock with the fishbowl.
Oh, okay. Cool. That was actually pretty smart. So they're about to lock Olaf up, but he says that if they lock him up, then he is going to release the fungus on the island and kidnap the Baudelaires. Ish says that the kids are under his protection and he won't let him take them.
And how do you plan to stop me?
With this.
Whoa, I think Olaf said it best.
It looks like the tide has turned and a storm is brewing.
So Ish shoots Olaf and, oh, looks like everyone's going to die now. I'm just kidding. We know they're all going to survive. So the island folk travel to get some horseradish to manufacture a cure and, oh.
There's always one thing you can do. You can die.
Wow, I didn't know that arrow actually made its way to his chest. Anyway, the Baudelaires leave Olaf and go attend to Kit. No, but Klaus, isn't that cruel? Or Violet, should you not leave someone to die even if they're as evil as Olaf? Oh, who cares, this show's nearly over. Kit is in labor and she only now tells the Baudelaires what's in the sugar bowl.
What's in the sugar bowl?
I honestly don't even care at this point. They've made us wait too long. It turns out that what was in the sugar bowl this whole time was sugar. An experimental sugar which doesn't just heal you from the mycelium, but it immunizes them from the disease altogether. I actually have questions about this, but we will talk about it in the conclusion segment of this video. So Kit finds out that her husband is dead, and the Baudelaires try to find an alternative to horseradish so they can cure themselves from the mycelium. They decide to skim read a book, and we have Snicket explain what skim reading is, even though he does not know where the Baudelaires are right now, nor does he know what they're doing. So it's quite the coincidence for him to pick up on this one word and explain the definition of it. I'm also surprised that this show hasn't already explained the definition of skim reading in any of the previous episodes, as this is a very basic thing. So the Baudelaires find out that they need an apple to cure themselves, but being too weak, they fall on the ground, and a snake randomly comes into the room. An unbelievably fake one too. And it actually gives them the apple. Sunny gives it to Violet, Violet gives it to Klaus, that is the most dramatic bite of an apple that I have ever seen. They take the apple to Kit, and she says if she eats it, it will harm her baby or something. I don't know. I didn't know that she was that much into her pregnancy. Anyway, the Baudelaires go to Olaf, and he helps them save Kit. Something that makes sense, seeing as he and Kit used to be a couple from what I gathered. Olaf tells the kids that he is not the reason that their parents died, which is very odd, but the show doesn't pick up on that rather large thread again.
What's that thing your brother used to say?
I don't know, the one you killed or the other one. So they both have a moment and speak to each other, and Olaf says his last words.
Don't have any kids yourself.
Kit gives birth, and she gives birth to a girl, and she gives her the same name as their mother. She asks the Baudelaires to look after a baby, and then she also dies. The Baudelaires have no idea what they should do next or where they should go, so they decide to start reading the book that their parents wrote and decide to go from there. And you can see the baby is not leaving the book alone, which must have been a pain during the shooting of this scene. So anyway, we see the Baudelaires living on the island, and I gotta say, this is kind of nice to see them living away from all the other characters from the show, including Mr. Poe, and it's nice to see them being able to take care of themselves. And strangely, the baby seems to have grown, but Sunny is exactly the same age. As for the rest of the characters, the Quagmire twins find their siblings, Olaf's henchmen are Broadway actors, I think. These two are on a mission to find their missing stepfather, the snake travelled in an attempt to give an apple to the other castaways, and after having lived on the island for over a year, the Baudelaires decide to leave. And we are given a final narration by Lemony Snicket, and he even gets a letter from a relative. And that relative turns out to be Beatrice Baudelaire, all grown up. Kinda. And she tells Lemony Snicket the story of the Baudelaire children, or the parts that he didn't know, and the stories about their lives as she was growing up. And we zoom out of the cafeteria, ending with a zoomed out view of the city where we see a huge VFD logo. And it is from there we reach the end of a series of unfortunate events. So, what did I think of the final episode? Well, and I am being completely honest here, I was actually really let down. Now let me first preference this by saying I liked quite a few of these scenes in this episode, and I did have a good enough time watching it, but as a final episode to this entire story, it felt very unfocused. And this whole island thing with the possibly mind-controlled hippie subplot which didn't go anywhere, it all honestly felt very random, and it left me with a complete lack of closure to this show. I really expected the final episode to show us everything from Lemony Snicket's perspective until he eventually finds the Baudelaires about halfway through the episode. That would have been a nice close to his arc, as we got him narrating the whole story so he could solve the mystery of the Baudelaires, and then he actually solves the mystery and finds them. For the first time, we as an audience would see the Baudelaires in the present rather than seeing stories about them from their past. Both Snicket and Olaf would have a final confrontation about what really happened that night. His sister could also arrive to avenge the death of her brother and husband, and they could all finally settle this big feud once and for all. But no, instead, Lemony Snicket is still doing narrations throughout the episode as if he is still retracing the Baudelaire steps in the past tense, and then we get this whole weird hippie island thing, which I will admit, it had some interesting revelations that came to light, but it ultimately felt redundant. I don't care who founded the VFD, I'm fine with thinking that it was a help organization that went on for generations, but to only now explain the origins of the VFD in the final episode, it just felt like a mess, and like it was trying to pad out the final episode. I still have many questions that were left unanswered. It tried to wrap up a couple things with Hookie and Olaf's henchmen, but what happened to Esme and Carmelita? What happened to his mentors? Are they still making more orphans out there? What happened to the orphaned kids? Did Kit manage to save them or not? Why did Esme want the sugar bowl so badly when all it did was make you permanently immune to a very specific disease? A disease that they just happened to stumble upon by accident in the depths of the ocean. What happened to Mr. Poe? And by by the way, this show does not get those 2 extra points I said it could have gotten for killing Mr. Poe. He just disappears out of the show, as do many of the other characters, and we just don't ever see them again. So many of the characters that this show sets up, it just throws them off to the side in the end as if they were nothing. If you were really going to just dispose of them like that, then you might as well have let them get poisoned for real by Esme. At the very least, it would have given you a reason to completely ignore them, and it would have given them some sort of an ending as opposed to just nothing. So yeah, the final episode had some good moments, but it just left me feeling so underwhelmed. Had I seen this before I made my Clone Wars binge watch video, this show would have joined the pile of shows that had lackluster season finales. So those are my thoughts on season 3's ending. Now, what are my concluding thoughts on this season as a whole, as well as the show in general, now that it's over? Well, fans of this series will not like this, but I had a really hard time watching this final season. And it's not just me. When I watched and reviewed A Series of Unfortunate Events seasons 1 and 2, I watched both of those seasons with my brothers and sister, and we all had a great time watching them from beginning to end, and we completed each season within a matter of days. But with season 3, we watched the first 2 episodes, and then we all just stopped after that. And usually if any of us got preoccupied with work or something, one of us would usually say, "So when are we going to continue watching A Series of Unfortunate Events?" But that didn't happen this time around with season 3. We brought it up occasionally in conversation, and rather than saying let's put it on, we all said the same thing to each other, which was, I just can't be bothered. And if it was just me saying that, then there is an argument to be made that maybe just I got bored of the show. But when all of my siblings shared the same opinion, then that means that the show has done something wrong and has lost its audience. And despite its problems, we still really enjoyed the show in its first 2 seasons, but the formula wore real thin with season 3. And yes, if it wasn't for the fact that I had to make this long overdue video, I would not have continued watching the show, and I would have no desire to go back. It just came to a point where I had lost interest in the Baudelaires, and I just wanted to watch episodes that were full-on origin stories of the VFD members, as I found those to be really interesting. I wanted to see more of that, but the Baudelaire story was just getting really tired and exhausting this season. Not to mention that some of the answers we got fell real flat. And as the show went on, the Baudelaires were making decisions that really made it hard for me to root for them. It's almost like they wanted to get caught. Now it's time to talk about what you've all been waiting for since I started covering the series. What are my concluding thoughts on Lemony Snicket and his overall involvement in this show? Well, in my binge watch of season 2, one of you told me that Lemony Snicket's constant appearances would make sense by the end of season 3, and you know what? You guys were right. At the very beginning of the series, you don't know at what junction Lemony Snicket was telling the story or why he was telling it. But in season 3, we are told why and how he fits into the story. And now his inclusion does make sense. That being said, I still feel like he was overused in the previous seasons. Like I said in my binge watch of season 2, we don't need Lemony Snicket to pause the episode and tell us the feeling of running away from danger. In the books, this needs to be explained, but in a visual format, we can see the horrifying body language and facial expressions of someone running away from danger. We don't need someone to explain it to us. And things like that, I still think didn't need to be explained. But many other parts of his narration over the course of the 3 seasons are now not as bad to me anymore. So yes, the show does largely justify Lemony Snicket's constant narrations throughout the show. But just when it won me over, it majorly lost me by having him narrate again in the final episode. Once he got caught up with the Baudelaire story in season 3 episode 6, that's where his narration should have stopped, and in the final episode, we actually see him in the field investigating and looking for clues to uncover the location of the Baudelaires, as the research he has been looking over has reached a dead end and he doesn't know where the Baudelaires are beyond this point of the story. So in the final episode, we should have seen him pick up the pieces and find the Baudelaires himself. And after talking about the Baudelaires for all this time, he finally gets to meet them. That would be such an amazing way to conclude the entire show, and it would give such an emotional weight and purpose and depth into Lemony Snicket's constant narrations throughout the show. But they didn't do that. They just had him narrate the final episode like he did every other episode. And it just felt like his investigation led him nowhere, and it made his whole recap of the Baudelaires throughout this 3-season show ultimately pointless. It needed to have a payoff with his investigation, but it didn't. And it just makes his character, although an iconic staple of this franchise, ultimately feel like a waste of time and a wasted opportunity for him to have what could have been a great conclusion to his arc and journey. If they did that, then I would have given his narration alone a 10 out of 10, as it may have seemed strange in the first 2 seasons, but it would have led to something so smart at the end of the story. But it didn't. It just settled for something that was very lame, devoid of creativity, and unforgivably anticlimactic. So I have gone back to feeling that his narrations haven't led to anything and are just overused. I mean seriously, how awesome and emotional would it have been if we saw him meet the Baudelaires like I told you, and then have him be there as well for the birth of his niece and the death of his sister, his last sibling. That would have been more emotionally powerful, and after narrating the story of the Baudelaires throughout all these seasons, he is actually with them during this big tragedy of his life. It would have been a much better ending, and it would have made him feel like a pivotal part of this story. I can go on forever for how they could have improved the ending, but the bottom line is, endings are very important, and I am very disappointed with the ending to A Series of Unfortunate Events Season 3, and it has really tainted my experience with this show as a whole. And A Series of Unfortunate Events Season 3 gets an average 5 out of 10. Netflix sure weren't kidding when they said they've saved the worst for last. This is definitely the worst of the 3 seasons by far. The first 2 seasons, despite how much they would follow a very predictable formula, they felt like they were about something, and they left an impact on you. Season 3 just felt like it was meandering, and then it just suddenly ended. It didn't feel like it was building to a final story and a concluding chapter. It just felt like Season 3 came in, gave us a few episodes of random adventures with the Baudelaires, and then it just ended. Honestly, the Jim Carrey movie gave me a much more satisfying ending than the show, and the movie had a very limited runtime. If the climax happened in that courtroom and all of the characters that Olaf had wronged had banded together to lock him away, then that would have been an amazing ending. But no, they ended it here. A super cheap set with super obvious green screens. Even Stevens the movie back in 2003 on the Disney Channel filmed on a real island. 16 years later, and this is what we get. And in general, I also thought that the production of this final season was below par. In Season 1, and especially Season 2, I remember seeing so many incredibly well-designed sets, but in Season 3, none of the sets stood out to me. They felt much cheaper and uninspired. I feel like the show really has run its course, and I feel like even the production team behind the show were feeling it too. The show really felt like it was overstaying its welcome, and honestly, it became quite preposterous as it came to the end, and I would honestly add this show to my personal list of disappointing series finales. I was not impressed with this final season. If you guys liked it, then that's great. I'm genuinely glad you enjoyed it. But for me, I couldn't be more relieved that this show has finally reached its end. So, that's it. As promised, that was my binge watch video, and I have finally covered every single live action interpretation of A Series of Unfortunate Events. Thank you so much for your patience, guys. I really do appreciate it. It's been over 3 years, and you guys were still asking me when this binge watch video was coming out, so I really hope it was worth the wait. Please do give the video a thumbs up and share it too, as it took me a long time to make, and it went through several copyright claims too, which are always a pain in the butt. And don't forget that for as little as $1, you can gain access to a ton of additional content on my Patreon. The links are in the video description. Thank you so much for watching, guys, and for your continued support, and I will see all of you very soon. Take care.